The move today that will be music to the ears of millions battling with student debt. Today, the Department of Education is expected to reach out to about 25 million Americans with information on how some or all of their debt could be canceled.
This has been a big cornerstone of the Biden-Harris administration. It's also had some hangups in the courts, but this all comes as the Federal Reserve meets today. We're waiting to see if we're going to get an indication of any Fed rate cuts to come later this fall, perhaps even in September. So much to get to. Let's bring in ABC News' Elizabeth Schulze in D.C. And I want to begin with this new student debt forgiveness program. Who is eligible for this? Because I know when President Biden pushed this before, the Supreme Court said no. So now the president's trying to work around it. Who is eligible for this?
Exactly. And guys, I'm always happy to join you to talk about finance and the bottom line. So this is a policy that would apply to about 25 million borrowers. Basically, what the Biden administration is trying to do is a more targeted, narrow approach toward forgiving student loans, because of course it had that sweeping plan that would have affected about 43 million borrowers, but that was struck down by the Supreme Court. So this new targeted plan is specifically for people who have had their interest balloon on their loans. So think about people who took out a set amount in loans to pay for school, and then because of interest, that amount has become a lot more than the amount they originally took out. What this plan would try to do is cancel the amount of debt that added and accrued because of interest. So importantly, this is not wiping out all of debt, but it would reduce that debt burden a little bit. The Department of Education sent out an email today to about 25 million borrowers who could be affected by this. There's another smaller cohort of borrowers who also been paying their loans for 2 decades and haven't really made a dent, who could also get debt relief. But what this is an attempt from the White House and President Biden to say, we are still trying to help these borrowers. We made a campaign promise to try to promise them debt relief. And here's one way that we're going to try to do this. But undeniably still, we do expect this will still face court challenges. Borrowers are going to have until August 31st to opt out of this proposal, but then we'll obviously have to see where it goes from there in the courts, too.
Elizabeth, it's Sam. I just love seeing you standing there. Is that the Capitol behind you live?
It is, yes.
And you're just like, it's so cool to me to know that we're talking to you in New York and you're just hanging out in the Capitol.
You can't be here, right?
And you have a second to talk to us about this.
It's an okay second. I mean, it's not as good as being on set, but I'm happy to be here.
No, I love that you're right there. So, you know, worst case this for me. This isn't terrible news for lenders, right? Are people going to go out of business if they can't get these loans? And it's going to help so many people.
You know, look, this is an issue. We have seen the tide shift a little bit, and that this idea of broad-based debt cancellation was honestly pretty obscure before the pandemic. But we did see during COVID this pause that basically meant people did not have to pay their loans at all for 3 years. They had 0 interest, and the servicers weren't happy about it, but they accepted that that was the reality. And so that's one of the arguments that you hear the advocates for student debt relief making is, we have done this before and we can do this again. But I mean, at the same time, yes, this could likely make some sort of dent in the bottom line of the servicers, the loan servicers. And when you talk to opponents of this, you know, one argument I hear a lot from people on the other side, including here in Capitol Hill, by the way, is what kind of precedent does this set? You know, a lot of people in the past took out student loans. They had to pay back their debt. Should we really be incentivizing that in the system? And that's one of the arguments we've also heard play out in court from some of the Republican state attorneys general who've been filing lawsuits against these plans put forward by the White House.
Elizabeth, I was curious, you know, this is a lame duck administration, and it seems like, you know, the president is, you know, taking some tactical maneuvers here. Is there a particular reason why he's focusing on certain things?
It is such a good point. I think it's impossible to look at any of these policy proposals being put out there outside of the context of November. I mean, we're 100 days less out, and the fact is the Biden administration, now the Harris campaign, needs the support of younger voters. And when you talk to those voters, we have been out and talking to them for years. One of the biggest issues for them is student loan debt. Borrowers feel like they are saddled with this debt. They're frustrated with the high cost of college. Yeah. They feel like they cannot get ahead. And so they are counting on Democrats, and they frankly rely on progressive Democrats often to get that message across. So we have seen some more, you could say, progressive proposals put forward from the administration in the past couple of weeks. I mean, recently they proposed a cap on rents, which is something that would have also seemed pretty out there just a couple years ago. So I think it's undeniable that a part of what's at play here is trying to appeal to those voters and make the case that this is the ticket that will advocate for some of those policies. Whether they can get passed through the legal system or through Congress is an entirely different question.
Great points.
Yeah, we know you'll be watching it closely. Elizabeth, great to see you.
Thank you.
Both in person and then there in D.C. for us
Always.
today. Yeah.
So cool.
Thanks, guys.